Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast, and we are back, as is the transfer window. We have come crashing through the entrance to yet another summer transfer window, and in typical Tottenham fashion, quite everything is up in the air. Players, coaches, managers. Wouldn't be Tottenham, would it, if there wasn't anything up in the air? Joining me on this show before I bring in our very special guest, who will be alongside me a lot, hopefully, this summer, I've got the wonderful Jim from the Oh So Spurs podcast. Jim, have we got those seatbelts ready?
We got them ready, especially the last few hours. It's all kind of erupted, hasn't it? But yeah, excited to chat about it today.
Likewise very much. Lovely to be back alongside me, Jim. And also back on the show, look, he does need no introduction. We've had to shift times. We've moved the world around. We're always going to make this work. We've got the brilliant presenter, broadcaster, journalist, of course, appears on TalkSport. Give Me Sport. You know it. He's there. He's everywhere. It means Ben Jacobs is back. Ben, how are you? Lovely to fit us in. I know it's a busy time for you right now and a busy time for Tottenham.
Yeah, really busy, and Tottenham is monopolising much of my time. Great to be back. Always enjoy the podcast. Good to be on with Jim as well. And thank you for fitting me in. Last Word on Spurs has kind of become afternoon Spurs as a one-off, but I'm sure as we go throughout the window, we'll get back to that 8, 9, 10, 11 time. And there was even a show we did where we finished after midnight once. So I'm looking forward to the summer.
You did have the very, very last word on Spurs on that one.
Looks like we lost Ricky as well there, Ben.
Wow. Spurs might lose Ange.
And now we've lost me. Well. They're trying to lose me. My apologies.
I thought it was my internet, but it was you.
Anything will try and disrupt us right now. We're going to try and carry on. Look, it's going to be a very, very busy summer, as we know, for Tottenham. Not just only that right now, it's a very busy next few days with regards to where things do stand on relation to the current head coach, which again, for those that listen and watch this show, that might have already changed in Ange Postecoglou. Daniel Levy's uncertainty weighing up what the future holds for him. We'll be coming on to that and where we stand. We also understand Ryan Mason, Tottenham's assistant coach, is closing in on a move to West Bromwich Albion. Where are we with that? Of course, with Ben, we'll be also discussing potential incomings, outgoings. Of course, Leroy Sané, the latest name on the Spurs rumour that is said to be interested in the club, and that as a rumour hasn't gone away and is still very much there. We shall see how that will play out. But we are slightly battling time restrictions, so we are going to crack right into the show and open up with the main topic, which of course is Ange Postecoglou's future, dominating really the last 7-8 days since that Champions League. I say Champions League, Europa League final, forgive me. I'm already going one step ahead. We are going to be in the Champions League next season. I'm not getting that carried away just yet. But look, where we stand right as of now, Tottenham Hotspur chairman Daniel Levy is still believed to be weighing up the future of Ange Postecoglou as he faces the crunch decision over the direction of the club. There are some fears within Spurs of a dressing room backlash if Postecoglou was to be sacked, although there is feeling amongst, we understand internally, that Tottenham staff did not understand Postecoglou's decision to prioritise the Europa League once he felt his injury-ravaged Spurs squad could neither achieve anything in the Premier League nor get relegated. Now, look, we understand Daniel Levy has been away from the UK in the last few days and has been on holiday, and that's why there has been this period of the last 7-8 days as we await to hear how this is going to play out. We know he's made history by leading the club to their first European trophy in over 40 years, ending a 17-year trophy drought. Alongside that, Tottenham booked their place in the UEFA Super Cup, which is going to be coming their way in August against Paris Saint-Germain, although we can't get away from the horrendous 17th place finish in the Premier League with a record 22 defeats. And is that the reason why there is big doubts with regards to Ange Postecoglou's long-term future at the club? He did pick up the John Duncan Award earlier in the week, which was presented to him by the LMA, who achieve historic and notable successes for their club. Honestly, Ben, there's a lot going on right now. We appreciate it's in the world of transfer which you're in, an ever-changing script, an ever-changing theme. Where are we, as you understand, on Ange Postecoglou's future at Tottenham? Does he have one?
Well, one thing's for sure, had they won the Champions League, as you suggested, not the Europa League, he'd definitely still be in a job. But another thing to say, had they lost that final, he would have been gone, and very quickly. So what I can tell you is that Spurs were succession planning even before the Europa League final. Reports this morning that say a decision's been made, Postecoglou's gone, are slightly premature. It's not to say that that won't be the direction of travel. But right now, and again, by the time people maybe watch this outside of a live environment, it could move. But as you also rightly say, Levy's been away, Postecoglou's been away. So I think, in short, clarity next week is expected. But the Postecoglou side, as I understand it, right now on a Sunday afternoon, remain in the dark. They've not had anything communicated to them. And silence may not be a good thing, because Tottenham are engaging with other candidates as well. And I think Levy in particular hasn't wanted to get into the same scenario as Manchester United 12 months ago, where there was such an outpouring towards Erik ten Hag and a celebration after Manchester United won the FA Cup, that in the end, Ineos decided to stick with ten Hag and then had to sack him in the early part of the season. And the reality is that Daniel Levy has to be dispassionate and cutthroat, and he'll be aware that Tottenham, with a window open and with Champions League football before a ball is kicked, is also more marketable to any new candidate as it is to Postecoglou. So you've had Postecoglou, because he's had all of his conversations already with Daniel Levy, expressing that with a summer of stability, hopefully less injuries, Champions League football, more money to spend, he can turn things around. That's why, after those conversations with Daniel Levy, Postecoglou said publicly at the parade that in TV, third series are better than seconds. And in football, he believes that he can kick on. But it's all really now about whether Levy, in this period of deliberation, changes his mind. Because if Postecoglou stays, it will be mind changed. If Postecoglou goes, that was always the plan before the Europa League final. And again, I know we're getting more and more reports that say a decision has been made, but my understanding right now, it could change in an hour, it could change in a day. But right now, Postecoglou has not been told anything. Now, when you think you have to make a change in football, you succession plan. Eventually, that turns into interviews and a formal process. Succession planning doesn't automatically mean you will make a change, but you have to be prepared, because if they do, they'll want to move quickly. And largely, the candidates being looked at, I'm told, have proven Premier League experience. So we know that Andoli Iraola was high in the thinking, but the expectation is actually that he'll stay at Bournemouth. Marco Silva has said publicly he wants to stay at Fulham. We'll see whether that's genuine or not. Inter or another club if Inzaghi leaves, ironically to Al Hilal, who made Silva an offer. They've got the Fulham boss on their radar as well. Glasner's got European football. So that leaves Thomas Frank. And as myself and colleague from TalkSport, Alex Crook, reported 2 weeks ago now, there is movement on the Frank side. As part, again, of succession planning, there's been meetings and contact between Frank and Tottenham. And if they do make a change in the next week or so, I expect Frank to be quite high in the thinking. Some suggestions that Inzaghi might be on the Tottenham radar if he leaves Inter as well following the Champions League final. My understanding is that if Inzaghi does depart, it will be quick, because he either has to go to the Club World Cup with Inter or exit. And then from Al Hilal's point of view, they are in the Club World Cup. And I think Saudi Arabia is more likely than Tottenham for Inzaghi at this stage. Roberto De Zerbi was another name discussed about 2 months ago. Marseille have got Champions League football of their own, and they're not anticipating a departure. So I think if Tottenham make a change, they're likely to stick with a candidate that's already managed in the Premier League. And I would keep an eye on the Thomas Frank situation, because we will expect clarity coming very soon as far as Postecoglou is concerned. But again, nothing as of now has been directly communicated to Ange Postecoglou.
Ben, yeah, I think it's pretty normal, isn't it, in any industry, that if you massively outperform on one KPI and underdeliver on another, at the end of your year or your annual season, whatever it is, there's going to be a review and a discussion around, you did really well over here, but how are you going to fix over here? And we need to just make sure that you're able to deliver on that KPI in the upcoming year ahead, because that's a key metric for our success. But so I don't think it seems strange to many Spurs fans, the idea that the club's exploring all options, and that's going to create a lot of kind of, rumors, and conjecture will come out and all that kind of stuff based on people's underlying opinions. But another thing I wanted to ask you, if you think this is going to influence decisions, is we've seen players coming out, Maddison, Gray and others, and it feels like from the outside in, they're proactively trying to almost voice some support for retaining Ange Postecoglou. Now, we might be overanalyzing that as, supporters of the club, but Berival's done it as well, as he's on the screen there. That did feel, and Romero, there's talk of him sticking around for one more season if Ange is to stay, and he's kind of pandered to those rumors with either fortunately timed posts on social media that could be a complete coincidence, or it is consciously being done. But do you feel that adds pressure onto Daniel Levy's decision, being closer to the club? Do you think that's going to influence in any way, make it more like a bigger decision for him to have to make, more pressure on it?
I think the biggest thing is just you see the outpouring when Postecoglou had a mic drop moment and won the trophy in his second season, and silverware is always going to suggest that there's hope and optimism for the project. And then when you add the fact that now they can compete in the Champions League, and I think even if you had no new signings, same manager, virtually the same situation, it would be very difficult to see Spurs losing 22 games next season, because the stats are so damning and the Premier League position is so low that Postecoglou, no doubt, and maybe some of the players would argue, with a little bit of money, with a little bit of momentum after winning the Europa League, things will improve. But it's whether or not the Daniel Levy situation is just, if you remove one trophy, which is highly significant to the club, and you look at the league season, which is the clearest indication of consistency because it's 38 games, is there enough there, or are there mitigating circumstances to keep him? And usually, like with Manchester United and Ten Hag, you might say, absolutely. If you deliver at the end of the season, perhaps that does buy the manager a stay of execution. But I come back to what I said before. This is a crossroads, and it is a one-off opportunity where a side extremely low in the Premier League with 22 losses that historically would usually at that number send a club down, has somehow got Champions League football. And for any candidate interested in Tottenham, they're going to be saying one thing: offer me the job now with Champions League football from day one and a budget to spend, or there's no chance that I want that job mid-season. And I think Tottenham have got this impression from all of the candidates that they've spoken to. With De Zerbi 2 months ago, they realised very quickly that if they would stand a chance, they'd have to get Champions League football. Marseille would have to miss out, and they would need to be decisive. You look at Thomas Frank, there's no guarantees that 10, 12 games into the season, he would leave Brentford for Spurs. And Dole Iriola is likely to commit to Bournemouth anyway, because he thinks he's building something stable there, and they're on the up. Glasner's now got European football. He's not going to jump ship mid-season whilst they're still competing in that. So therein lies the irony. Postecoglou will be arguing trophy plus Champions League means wipe the slate clean, move forwards, not backwards, spend a bit of money, and he'll fix it. And there may be a compelling argument there. And anybody new that may come in is saying now or never. So Daniel Levy has to decide, and quickly, whether or not he's going to be cutthroat and dispassionate, or whether or not he's going to give Ange Postecoglou a bit more time. And once again, despite the reports from this morning, and I respect any other journalists, my information remains that Levy and Postecoglou have not communicated with each other at the moment. That could change tonight, tomorrow. It could be a matter of minutes or hours. But as of now, Postecoglou remains in the dark. Then regarding the players specifically, I think it's normal that they would hold up the banner. I think it's obvious that many of the senior players like Postecoglou and feel there's been mitigating circumstances as to why Spurs haven't been able to succeed and find consistency, because some of these senior players in question, like Maddison, have been injured themselves, which is obviously why he wasn't able to play in the Europa League final. But I don't think, to answer your question directly, the public outpouring from the players will cloud Levy's judgment, because prior to that and before the Europa League final, I was told that Levy spoke to some of the senior group about Postecoglou to try and crystallize his opinion. So this again is about one thing. Does Daniel Levy stick to a decision that was basically made before the Europa League final? And if he does, Postecoglou will go, or will he be influenced by winning the Europa League final? And if so, it will be a U-turn and Postecoglou will stay.
I think what is really fascinating, which you already touched upon, Ben, you've kind of given us a bit of a lowdown there in relation to who Spurs have spoken to, haven't spoken to in the last 2 or 3 months. I mean, I think a lot of Tottenham fans, the biggest problem there is that it doesn't feel like there's an obvious candidate right now out there that really does kind of tickle their fancy, that it feels as a massive, decisive upgrade from Ange Postecoglou. I think that's why you're seeing a massive split right now in the fan base. I can just say there's already nearly 7,000 that are watching this show live right now, and I can see amongst a lot of the live comments that are coming into this show, you know, you've got a good 40-50% that would love to see Ange being given that chance for the 3rd season. You've got some that just simply say, look, the 22 league defeat is simply unacceptable and we need to change. I mean, look, many reference that kind of Ten Hag moment from, you know, last season, which United got themselves into, but we also can't forget, you know, United have got worse since they've sacked Ten Hag. They brought Ruben Amorim in. They've only taken 9 points from when he's taken over in terms of the Premier League season. Yes, clubs have to be given time in terms of managers being given that assurance and time to build. Do you think that's the biggest problem for Tottenham right now, that although they've spoken to some candidates, there's not really an obvious managerial candidate out there, which is why there has been this kind of pendulum swinging over the last 7-8 days or so?
It could be a factor. I mean, if you can't find a universally acceptable candidate that you think is going to move the project forwards, then you don't make a change and you stick to an extent with what you've got. And I think that was also a factor for Manchester United with Erik Ten Hag. It was 1, they won the FA Cup, and 2, at that point, they couldn't find the right candidates. Ironically, Ruben Amorim did decide to come in mid-season, but he first said to Manchester United, I'd prefer the job in summer 2025. And they said it's a take it or leave it offer now. So I suppose if we're fair to Spurs, we shouldn't underestimate the pull and stature and location of the club. And if they go to a candidate, even if it is 10, 15 games into the season, maybe with Champions League football, some candidates might come. But I think a lot of them in the Premier League, if they're going to move, it's now or never. And some of them have got other options. And then coming back to what I said before, the Premier League season is the most consistent gauge of where you're at. And really a microcosm of that is after the Europa League final. I know you could say they were in celebration mode and there's an element of a hangover, whether metaphorical or literal, but to go from that high, and it still wasn't the best spectacle of a final, to them being thrashed by Brighton on the final game of the season, it sums up where Spurs are at the moment. And to clarify, because I saw it questioned in the chat, I didn't refer to 38 points. I referred to 22 losses in a 38-game season. And that's the highest number of losses a side has ever had that has stayed up. So usually, if you lose 22 games in a season, you go down. Tottenham have managed to not draw that many, which means the 11 wins they've got have contributed 33 of their 38 points. And that's the difference between them being 17th or worse. Luckily as well, if you look at the table there, 25, 22, 12, incredibly low totals. If it was at the other extreme, even though we don't see it as often in the Premier League, and you have that 40-point mantra to stay up, Spurs could have been in big trouble. So I think this comes down to what I said before. Daniel Levy will have to assess the whole season and try not to be clouded by the emotion of winning the Europa League. And now it's all about, can he fix it with Ange because they've got Champions League? So not so much being judged only by that final, but the knock-on of winning that final is they've got Champions League money, and thus they can be more aggressive in the market. So Levy will be thinking, can Ange take this momentum with that money and fix this project in the Premier League? Or is he going to stick to his first opinion, which is he needs to make a change? And again, there's no doubt whatsoever, if Tottenham hadn't won the Europa League final, Postecoglou would already be gone.
It's also, you can understand the dilemma, because I hear that a lot. The league is a general representation of kind of how good you are over an average of a season. And that is true. But I think we look at it as fans as also a barometer for how close we are to winning trophies. Even if we know we're not going to win it, we think, well, if you're knocking around second, third, fourth or fifth, you're in the mixer of teams that are good enough to win a trophy. So that's from the fans' perspective. But we've sat there a lot as Spurs fans and, well, come out of nothing every time we've done that. But equally, I think the main thing that Levy looks at, and I know people say it's money focused over glory, but money helps you get glory. And he will look at the Europa League versus Champions League. If you're in the Champions League, you're going to bring in gross revenue approximately £80 million more than you are being in the Europa League if you go far in the Champions League versus going far into the Europa League. And when you look at amortizing transfers, that's 80 times 5. That's 400 million worth of effective transfer budget if you could guarantee Champions League football every season. So that's probably where the club's going, great, super happy we won a trophy. That is really important, but we can't bank on winning the European Cup every season to re-qualify. So a more consistent way of getting in there, and then in turn having more money to spend, and in turn winning more trophies, is a manager who can consistently deliver in the league. So they've got to assess, can we, if are all these losses, though, I think then we've got to assess, and it's a big wider topic, isn't it? It's like we've all seen the stats of without Van der Ven, without Romero, without Udogie, all these key players, the drop-off is really significant. And there's been debates around, well, Spurs should still be doing better with Davies and Gray at centre-back. Well, I think Davies is rumoured to be in talks of Wrexham, which to me shows his level is not, as a centre-back, probably a mid-table Premier League centre-back. And Archie Gray did wonderfully. What a young talent. But he is by no means a Premier League centre-back either. So we do have to acknowledge that the level of players that were playing a lot of the time weren't there. But then we also have to factor in, well, there's injuries because of the way we were playing. Were they exemplified by the manager? So it's such a tough decision that you'd assume there's been tons of meetings going on leading up to that Europa final. And then the euphoria of the win comes in, and then there's but maybe you can turn this around. Maybe we can do this under Ange Postecoglou. And do you know a bit, Ben, about like when the board sit down, right? Levy's only a 30%-ish shareholder, right, of the decision-making process. So there will be others voting. For all we know, he could be staunchly in, and a group of people on the other side of the table could be saying, I think it should go in the other direction. Is there like a mix of people who can't decision, or is it genuinely Daniel Levy, that just could overhaul the ultimate call on this one?
I think it's basically Daniel Levy, although the new CEO that's incoming, Vinay, will have a kind of fresh perspective and is very highly rated. I know not that popular with every Tottenham fan because of his Arsenal links, but an experienced and very well acclaimed individual who effectively will inherit everything from now. But a bit like Omar Barada when he came into Manchester United during his first summer, will have some say as well. But essentially, from what I understand, and despite the share split, as you allude to, this is a Daniel Levy decision. And my expectation is that Levy will recommend the decision to the board, and then they will back him and they will endorse whatever he decides to do. But a lot of these conversations have been ongoing between board members or ownership, between Levy and players. And actually, the one thing, like I said before, that hasn't happened now, but it did before the Europa League final, is that direct conversation between Postecoglou and Levy. And it felt kind of like after the Europa League final, Postecoglou was speaking to Levy from the top of a bus, because I'm not aware of any board meeting between Levy and Postecoglou formally in a room, maybe with some of the other owners there to discuss, to review. It feels like Postecoglou's just said, I made my case. I've said everything I need to say publicly and prior to the final to Daniel Levy. I'm just going to turn my phone off, go on holiday, come back, and then learn my fate. And that's probably where we're at. And weirdly, that was exactly the same again with Erik Ten Hag. It's virtually a parallel. Ten Hag went on holiday. He was completely in the dark. There was a lot of speculation. Everyone said that he was going to be sacked before the FA Cup final, although Manchester United sources to me had never gone that far. And then suddenly when he arrived back from holiday, it was good news. So this is why we have to be a little bit cautious in reporting. I understand Spurs fans who are listening just want clear-cut answers. But if Postecoglou hasn't been told yet, we have to be a little bit wary, because maybe Levy is 90% sure what he's going to do, but perhaps he himself has gone off on holiday to be 100% sure before communicating that decision. What I would say is I'd be surprised if we get to Friday, end of this week, and we don't know the future of Ange Postecoglou. But the other thing is there will be a onus on Tottenham to communicate sacking and do that quickly. If he stays, I'm not necessarily expecting a formal announcement. Of course, through sources, we'll learn of it very quickly. But I don't think Spurs are obligated to say, after much deliberation, we've decided to keep Postecoglou, whereas, of course, it becomes a club statement if they choose to get rid of him. And then the last thing, just on the form and whether this factors into stuff, is, yes, of course, winning the Europa League, incredible. Take nothing away. A special moment for Tottenham. Brilliant to see the fans' celebrations, long overdue, and something that everybody can really get behind. And finally, we can move on from this Spursy nonsense, because the reality is that Arsenal didn't win a trophy this season. Are they Arsenal-y? When my side Leicester won the Premier League, there was allegedly Arsenal, our closest contenders. But by the end of it, it was that Tottenham-Chelsea game, and nobody was even talking about Arsenal. Chelsea haven't won the Premier League in a few years. Newcastle needed 70 years to win a major domestic trophy. Tottenham had won trophies before that. It's the Premier League. It's difficult. And the irony upon irony is, if you're striving to win a trophy, you can put all your resources into the League Cup and the FA Cup. But if you're doing well, then you're prioritizing Champions League, which is the hardest one to win, and league form. So then statistically, you perhaps got less chance of winning a domestic trophy because you're going to rotate more than other clubs. So I think it's really easy for other clubs to just band one-worders, Spursy, or phrases like bottled it. And the reality is that you're talking about a club with a great fan base, a phenomenal stadium. Even at their worst, they've still had games that have been exciting and played attractive football, and they've won themselves a trophy. And yeah, the pathway to that trophy in the league phase was not necessarily that difficult with Karabag or EZ, but there was still Roma and Rangers. There was still Frankfurt in the quarterfinals, and there was still Manchester United in the finals. So I think we have to put some respect on that. My concern when Levy is looking at this is more, if you go from late Feb in the league, and I know partly injuries and partly a focus on the Europa League, but if you go from late February, you're looking at one solitary Tottenham win since, I think, the 26th of February, the defeat at home to Man City, until the end of the season, you're looking at one win. And even that one win is against Southampton, one of the worst ever Premier League teams in a single season. And it's really hard if you only take that league run and you discount the Europa League, not to say every single manager at a club like Spurs with that run from late February until the end of the season, with one solitary win against the bottom side Southampton, every single manager, in my opinion, if you only took that run, would be sacked, and might have even been sacked before the season ends. So don't want to repeat myself too much, but again, Levy's perspective was Ange to go. So if Ange stays, it will be a change, and it will be a change basically born out of winning that trophy.
It's going to be fascinating how it works out. Look, we are going to go for our first break of the show for our listeners and audio. Ben has referred to it a couple of times. Let's remind you about what Ange did promise if he did get season 3, which I know for some they're really holding on to. Let's hear from Ange on that, and we'll be back after this short break.
I told them, and they laughed. I told them, and they didn't believe. But here we are. And we're here because of this unbelievable group of people, players, and staff, absolute heroes, led by the legend, Heung-Min. Kuti Rivero, James Madison, and Guillermo Vicario. All of them heroes, and they did it all for you. Because you deserve it. This club deserves it. And I'll tell you something, I'll leave you with this. All the best television series, season 3 is better than season 2. Thank you.
It does feel like we're in a bit of a movie at the moment. I think the last fortnight of Spurs fans, I feel like we're in a movie, and we're coming to that next plot twist that Daniel Levy is the controller of, and we're kind of knowing, or well, not knowing, are we? We're unsure as to which way it will go. Look, we're joined by, alongside with a brilliant Jim over at the Also Spurs podcast. I'm only bringing Jim back for a quiet one, aren't I? I tell you what is this man let in for this summer? What has he got in store? And we're also joined with a brilliant broadcaster, presenter, journalist. You see him often on TalkSport, football correspondent with Give Me Sport as well. The brilliant Ben Jacobs is joining us, as are over 10,000 of you that are watching this show live. Thanks for all the support for Last Word on Spurs. As I said in my intro, we're meant to come gate crashing through for a transfer show. And here we are in typical Tottenham fashion, where it's another manager debate. And it would only be Tottenham where you've got that after a manager leaves. You've got to say an indelible mark of it is going to be where he brings a first European trophy to the club in over 40 years, ends a trophy drought in 17 years, but as we know, has achieved the worst points total Tottenham have ever had in the Premier League. And that's why we're having this debate right now. I'll ask the audience out there, please keep liking, please keep subscribing. Make sure we try and get this out to a far wide Spurs audience. I've got to promise Ben the next time we bring him on, we'll bring him on into a quieter period, but Ben's going to join us throughout the transfer window. So there's a lot to cover. On the subject of coaches, let's talk about one of the coaches of Ange's current staff that may also be on the move imminently, if we're led to believe some reports out there. And that is that Ryan Mason is understood to be close to agreeing a deal to become the new West Brom manager. He's reportedly in advanced talks to be appointed. Now, Mason's overseen 13 games as an interim boss during his time at Tottenham, following the dismissals of Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte. Ben, any news on Ryan's potential move to West Brom and how that may shake things up at Tottenham in more ways than one?
Well, there'll be no interim. So if Postecoglou goes, then it won't be Ryan Mason coming in. But I think you're absolutely right in what you say. And again, confirming some other reporting out there that it's looking very likely that Ryan Mason will be off to West Brom. And for the 33-year-old, it's a chance to go up from being an assistant and an interim to a first-team manager, and too good an opportunity, as far as I'm aware, to turn down. I don't think there's an agreement in principle yet between Mason and West Brom, so still a little bit of work to do. And I also think that Mason wanted to go away for a few days and just deliberate and discuss and ask some of his mentors what was right. So we're not only talking about a negotiation that is advanced over the finances, it's also a very thorough decision-making process from Mason as well. But it looks like he is going to depart and move into first-team management. I think I'm right in saying he was also an option on their shortlist in January as well, but decided not to move mid-season. I don't know whether West Brom at that point perhaps had other names in mind too. But now it looks like he's finally going to leave Spurs. And I think that it will be a move that suits him. And I think Tottenham fans would be quite excited to see how he fares as a first-team manager should that move to West Brom in the Championship come off.
Ben, another thing that's been swirling around lately was rumours on Tell and Davies, because we saw the Forster, Reguilon and Whiteman announcements that they would be leaving now that their contracts have expired. And Danso is going to be signed permanently. But it was interesting that Davies, who's out of contract, and Tell, whose loan's ending, they weren't mentioned. Did that signify that Spurs are trying to keep both those players? I mean, it makes sense to take an option to extend Davies' contract and get some transfer fee before he departs, right? But Tell's also been a bit quiet. There was rumours that we were negotiating a reduced fee versus what was initially negotiated in the loan. Have you heard much on those two?
So with Tell, my information is a little bit different, because my understanding is the option actually becomes more of an obligation. So my expectation is that Tell stays, and as long as all of the criteria are triggered, then actually Tottenham won't have a choice. They'll just have to buy at the number negotiated, the original option, which I believe was in the region of 55 million. So I'm expecting Tell to permanently become a Spurs player, but I don't think there's that much leeway for negotiation. It was quite a complicated clause based upon minutes and output, but also based upon Champions League. And I think almost all of the aspects required have actually been met, to the point where Tottenham may just have to buy now because option becomes an obligation. I'm not so sure that there's as much leeway as has been suggested to kind of dance around that number. And I also think if you go back to the Tell story, Daniel Levy originally agreed 60. He flew over personally to get it over the line. That was what they wanted to pay. Then there were these reports somehow that Tell had changed his mind. Then Arsenal made a late inquiry. And then suddenly on deadline day, Tell's flying over to Spurs, which caught a lot of people, myself included, by surprise, because it did look at that point like the deal had fallen through. And basically the Tell loan fee, depending on which side you ask, is as high as 10 million or as low as 5 million. And the option to buy is in the region of about 55. So basically 60 million all in to loan and buy, 60 million or so originally agreed, and then it fell through to buy outright. And therefore, Tottenham have kind of budgeted for this and allocated that money and wanted to do Tell permanently anyway. They were not looking for a try before you buy. It was always about trying to just get him and pay for him and land him permanently. So my expectation is that Tell stays. I don't think there's as much flexibility just to return him. And I think there's a fair chance, and I'll try and give you more on this definitively in the coming days, but I think there's actually a fair chance that the option has kind of already become an obligation. And even if it hasn't, I would not be surprised if Tottenham just go to do that deal, and quite quickly now. With Davis, as you rightly say, there's a fair argument to say extend him, protect his value, and then he goes. He's been important for Spurs during injuries to play in that defence. But we know when everybody's fit, it's going to be a slightly different story. And I think Davis will be looking for game time as well. And he'll know even with Champions League and the extra burden, he may get less game time. And had they not had all the injuries, then I think Spurs would have been planning this summer pretty definitively for Davis to go. You're right to mention Wrexham as one possibility, although I'm not so sure coming up from League One to the Championship that their wage bill is going to allow them to do too many of those kind of signings. We hear links with players like Jamie Vardy and Patrick Bamford. And in the case of Bamford, there's some substance and interest, less so with Vardy, but the stumbling block for both is wages. and Ben Davies on a Premier League wage. And I don't think Wrexham are going to keep this model of always having the highest wage bill in the league. So it might be quite difficult for them. I'd keep an eye also on Leeds United too. They definitely were interested in Davies when they were still in the Championship. Now we have to wait and see whether they move, because targets can change due to promotion. Nico Elvedi is another name I hear for Leeds, who can play left back or left centre back. That's one I expect them to bid for in the coming days. So the Ben Davies situation is open, but it is fair to say that Tottenham are open to offers. And if you're open to offers, then extending the contract only helps you protect the value and bring in the most money possible.
Ben, thank you so much. We're going to stick with some of the leadership group now that, as we know, have been linked with some moves away. We'll start with, of course, the captain, Heung-Min, who after a decade finally delivered that elusive trophy he'd been crying out, wanting to deliver, which we've seen some emotional scenes over the course of the last 8-9 days in a Spurs shirt. We do understand, according to reports, that he does remain a target for the Saudi Pro League, and he has been on their radar since 2023. We know that in Saudi, they do like to bring statement signings to the club. I think we also understand it comes as part of a move to bring in new audiences and sell international TV rights. Do you feel, Ben, on that basis when it comes to Heung-Min Son, the fact that he has finally got that trophy after a decade, would now be the right time to depart Spurs, where, if we're going to be honest with you, maybe that his form is on the other spectrum as to where it was when we knew he was at an elite level?
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it, that Son's Premier League form dipped. But what a moment to watch him with that big beaming smile. And he was in tears as well when he was with his family lift the Europa League trophy. And if that is to be a farewell, it's going to be a memorable one. I think from Son's point of view, he doesn't think his time at Spurs is up. We know that they extended the contract. Whether that's to protect the value or not, a bit like we discussed with Davies, remains to be seen. The Saudi interest is there. It's concrete, but it's all on Son, because Son has actually been a Saudi target since 2023. And when they approached him, when the Saudi project was first kind of blowing up and they were signing lots of players, Son said no. He had no interest at that stage in going to Saudi Arabia. Now the project is less formative. It's 2 years on. Maybe he's changed his mind, but I'm still not aware of a concrete new offer for Son. Back in 2023, it was Al Ahly who were very keen on bringing him over. Then last summer, there was a new inquiry to see whether the player had changed his perspective, and still Son said, no, I want to stay at Spurs. So it's all just going to come down to whether it's right for Son and his family, because as soon as Son gives a green light, there will be a bid from Saudi Pro League sides. I'm told Al Qadsiya are one to watch, and they're interesting because they are owned by Aramco, the Saudi oil giants. And as a consequence, they don't have to rely on central funds, which gives them a bit more freedom in the market to go and spend a lot of money without first getting approval from the Ministry of Sport. You have the 4 PIF clubs, of course. I think a return bid from Al Ahly is less likely because they've added Galeno, who's a left-sided attacker. They've got Ivan Toney up front. And at the moment, anyway, they've still got Bobby Firmino playing behind. And they've got a Saudi national team player, Firaz Al-Burakan, who's a left or central-sided attacker too. And their quota's full. So Firmino is expected to leave Al Ahly. There might be space to add one more attacker who's versatile and can play in more than one position. But I'd be surprised if Al Ahly return. But keep an eye on Al Qadsiya. They might be one to watch. But it's not really about Spurs braced for offers or anything concrete yet. It's more just Saudi dealmakers have insisted year on year on year for Son. They keep returning and the financials don't really change. So you don't need to make a new offer. You just need to keep touching base with the player to find out, have you changed your mind about Saudi? And Son's been asked 3 or 4 times and said 3 or 4 times he doesn't want to go to Saudi. So now it's just all on whether the player has a different perspective. And if he says yes to the project, a bid will be forthcoming quite fast.
There's another thing I think we can consider, though, as Spurs fans, those big decisions like on Son, is Spurs' European squad is pretty full when it comes to non-homegrown players. So they could actually, just to force players to make a decision to leave, they can actually say, well, you're not going to be in our Champions League squad in the upcoming season. It'll be interesting to see if which senior players they do that to. But somebody will definitely be in that squad if he's still with us, Ben, who was, I'd argue, probably the most important player to us winning that trophy. We've all been critics of his at different points as Spurs fans for his availability and things like that. But we all saw the leadership skills Romero brings to us in the massive games. And that feels a little bit almost irreplaceable. But we all know his contract situation, which I believe is 2 years left, right? And do you believe there's two kind of bits? Do you think there's much substance in the belief that if Ange stays, he stays, but if someone else comes in, he's going to force that move? I think we all realize it will probably be his final year with Spurs this year, most likely, and he's unlikely to extend. But do you see him staying on, or do you see him going? Because I know Atletico Madrid supposedly want him, but can they afford him, right? That's the other question.
Yeah, that's the key question. I don't think Romero's future hinges upon Ange Postecoglou. I think it hinges on Atletico Madrid and whether or not they're prepared to pay what it takes. Because as I've reported before and is now widely backed up, Atleti's interest is serious. Romero is one of their key targets and they are prepared to make a bid, but they want to pay between 40 and 45 million euros. And even though Tottenham's price is not as high as when maybe Romero was more linked with Real Madrid, clearly Spurs will be looking to make more than they paid. And ideally, a figure likely closer to, I would say, 60 million euros. Some Spurs fans listening may say that number should be even higher, but you've got to factor in the contractual situation as well. And it's kind of an all or nothing thing, because if you want to keep Romero, you've got to offer him improved terms and agree a new deal. Otherwise, it may be the time to cash in. So Atleti are going to try. Romero's one of their key targets, but their starting number feels a bit low for Spurs to significantly engage. I don't think the player's waiting for managerial clarity. I think he's happy to stay at Spurs with Ange or without Ange, but he said publicly he'd like to try a stint in La Liga. And now he's won a trophy, he might feel it's the right time to depart. And unfortunately, compared to other suitors, Atleti have got everything Spurs have got. It would be one thing if it was maybe another Premier League club missed out on Champions League football, and then Tottenham have got it. But you're dealing with a like for like here, and therefore everything Spurs can offer him in terms of football, Atleti can offer him arguably more. Perhaps they'll go further in the Champions League than Spurs. That's no disrespect to Spurs. I just mean if you looked at the bookies' odds for who's going to go further, you'd probably say Atletico Madrid are bookies' favourite to go further in the Champions League than Spurs. If you look at odds for La Liga versus Spurs to win the Premier League, even with Barcelona and Real Madrid, you'd probably think Atleti are going to get closer to whoever wins La Liga or stand a chance of winning it. I don't think many would have Spurs in their top 3 or 4 favourites to win the Premier League. So it's quite a like for like kind of move. And then it comes down to the player, if he can play Champions League and hopefully at both clubs be challenging in the upper echelons of the table, what does he want? And maybe Spain is the right kind of move for him and his family. And I think that's what it might come down to. So for me, this is quite a simple one, really. If Atleti pay what it takes, then I expect Romero to ask to leave.
Ben, thank you so much as always. We appreciate that update. We're going to move on now from some of the leadership group, some of the players that have been linked to and from the football club. And that leads us to one player who had an influential final, you've got to say, in Yves Bissouma. But I think it's fair to say that we haven't realised Bissouma's long-term potential in a Tottenham shirt that we hope we would have seen since his move from Brighton, which you have to go back now to 2022, £35 million move at the time. Really incredibly inconsistent during his time in a Spurs shirt. Aston Villa being one of the clubs maybe linked with a summer move for him. Do you have any kind of indication, Ben, at the moment with regards to what the future does hold for Yves Bissouma?
Yeah, there's a concrete possibility that he could depart. As you say, it's been a hit and miss kind of impact since moving to Spurs, although probably fair to say that towards the end of the season, he started to show a bit more consistency. And you never know, especially if Postecoglou was to stay, that might change the perspective slightly. But I think for the right offer, Tottenham would sell. You're kind of right to raise Villa, although I'm not aware of any club-to-club contact at the moment. There's interest in Basuma from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and a couple of Turkish clubs, I'm told, have inquired as well. The situation specifically with Villa is that their PSR position is very tight. And I think it's going to be difficult for Villa to do significant business, especially with a lack of Champions League football before perhaps the 1st of July when the financial year ends. So we may have to be a bit patient with the future of Basuma, because I think the player will bide his time as well. He wants to stay in the Premier League. I'm told Leeds are another one to watch. They're looking to add another midfielder. It will all come down to finances and wages for them too, because even though Leeds have got promoted to the Premier League, and we know Manor Solomon is a player they'd love to sign as well, they're going to be quite disciplined in the market, because as we saw last season, 3 newly promoted sides coming up, 3 newly promoted sides going down. They definitely don't want to overextend, and I don't see them overpaying for players either. And therefore, Basuma is aware of this volume of interest. Even Everton, I'm told, could come into the mix as well, because they're going to be losing a couple of midfielders and also looking to strengthen in that area too. So it wouldn't surprise me if this one maybe drags on for a week or two more, but Villa could be one of the clubs to keep an eye on. I just don't see them doing anything before the financial year closes.
Then there's another player, I think if he doesn't play for you, a lot of fans don't really like him, but he's he's a bit of a kind of a cult hero when he plays you, because he's got such a passionate energy around the team. We know his ulterior love is just to represent his country and do well in Richarlison. It sounds like, similar as you mentioned with Son earlier, it's like all well and good getting these offers from leagues with lots of money in Saudi Arabia, wherever it is, but if the player doesn't want to go, they're not going to go, because they're prioritizing playing for their international side, and the decisions they make are largely around that. Do you hear much around him at all? Because there's been links to other clubs, and there's a lot of concerns that he can't stay fit long enough to kind of fill that important spot in Spurs' squad that they need in that front three. Even though he was, I think we all can see from that Europa League final, he's definitely got a big value when he is fit to play.
Yeah, huge value when he's fit. And it was great, wasn't it, a few months ago to hear Richarlison speaking so candidly about his mental health and being in a happier place, which is brilliant to see. And I think most Spurs fans that I speak to, maybe people in the chat disagree. It's probably a slightly larger pool of people if there's 10,000 watching. But I think a lot of Spurs fans that I speak to, the majority of people I've asked, would love it to work with Richarlison and still see the potential there. But due to injuries, Solanke's now arrived. In previous seasons, Son's been able to lead the line as well. You wonder whether or not it might suit all parties for him to depart. But what suits all parties, if that's to happen, is getting that 55 or 60 million number. And that's been the main stumbling block in previous windows, that Tottenham have been relatively firm on their asking price. So now we have to understand whether there's any more flexibility and the price drops this summer. And if so, it opens it up to Brazilian clubs in particular. I know in previous windows we've heard Son is reluctant to go to Saudi and Richarlison is reluctant to go back to Brazil. But actually, I think Son's position is maybe still quite fixed, and Richarlison is becoming more and more open to other opportunities, including potentially Brazil or outside of Europe. Saudi Arabia is still there for Richarlison as well. In summer 2024, Al Ahly bid for Richarlison and were prepared to pay 60 million. And there was a point where Tottenham thought that deal might happen, but Richarlison didn't want to go to Saudi. Now he's a bit more open to the project, but there's not as many Saudi clubs looking for strikers as there were 12 months ago, because Al Qadsiya signed Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Al Ahly signed Ivan Toney, Karim Benzema's still at Al Ittihad. We have to wait and see whether Cristiano Ronaldo stays at Al Nassr, Al Hilal want Victor Osimhen, and they've still, for now anyway, got Alexander Mitrovic, who might be available in the market. Is a concrete possibility that he leaves Al Hilal if Osimhen comes in. But the Saudi market for strikers isn't as big as it was. It's more wingers they're looking for, which is why Luis Diaz and even Alejandro Garnacho could be two to watch in the coming weeks. And Richarlison, I'm not aware of now, 12 months on, has any option in Saudi Arabia. Let's see whether that changes. This exceptional 1st to the 10th window is open to Saudi clubs as well. So we might see some movement in the coming days, but it's all really previously been about asking price. And there's very few clubs that have been prepared to match Tottenham's valuation. And that's why we haven't seen any movement. And then there were stories out there a few weeks ago. Again, I respect other reporting naturally, so I'm not here to intentionally shout down anyone else's work. But I'm not aware, despite rumours, of anything between Everton and Richarlison. I don't have any information that suggests that Everton are going to return to try and sign Richarlison. And I think if he was to depart, even though there may be a willingness to go back to Everton, but generally I think the player realises if he's going to leave Spurs, he's probably going to be leaving the Premier League as well.
Ben, thank you so much. It feels like there's a story behind everyone at the moment, quite literally. It's Tottenham. It's the transfer window, right? Brace yourselves. That's all I can say, brace yourselves. I'm trying to. Let's talk about another player that at the moment there's been regards to links about maybe leaving the club. There's also been reports that he's ready to sign a new contract. Again, hearing different stories about this might be dependent on who the manager is going to be, which is currently up in the air at the time of recording. And that is Rodrigo Bentancur. Reports coming out, I think, of Luis from Spain, Italy have indicated that Bentancur is ready to sign a new deal with Tottenham, but does want clarity as to who Tottenham's next manager is going to be and could potentially still end up as being a future captain of the football club. Now, we did hear reports, I would say, earlier in May time, I think that there was interest from Atletico Madrid, not only Romero, but also in Bentancur about a potential double deal over the course of the summer. And there are also reports about Mikey Moore potentially signing a new long-term contract at the club. So just a couple of different ideas there, Ben, in regards to those two, Romero, Bentancur, Mikey Moore. Any news on the contract front with regards to those two individuals?
Yeah, Mikey Moore will stay and extend. That's my understanding. I don't know exactly when it's going to be done, but talks have been very positive and can be referred to as advanced. And obviously, we know Tottenham rate Mikey Moore extremely highly. So that one should be very smooth. I don't think the player would be looking elsewhere anyway. Very happy at Tottenham, regardless of the Ange situation. Bentancur's a slightly different situation because obviously he's a slightly older player and does want some kind of guarantees as to the direction of travel with the project, which you'd expect from a 27-year-old. But Tottenham is still calm about the situation. As you allude to, they're in talks with him over a new deal. There's a few clubs in Europe that have made inquiries. Atleti are one of them. But I don't get the impression that he's as high on their list as maybe he was 6 to 12 months ago. Monaco are another club that have made an inquiry on Bentancur as well. And I think we're going to hear some links and some prices and some speculation. But for me, it's all kind of leverage, which is very normal. And the more noise there is, the more the player can obviously use that to get the guarantees he's looking for from Spurs. But the first priority, I'm told, is still Bentancur and Spurs. And maybe it's not as simple or as advanced as Mikey Moore, but Tottenham have already started these conversations to get Bentancur to extend. And he's not a player that they want to lose or are planning to lose this summer.
Well, touching on a couple of wingers, probably slightly less sought after by our fan base at the moment than Mikey Moore in terms of their futures. We've still got Manor Solomon, who sounds like he's had a pretty good loan spell this season at Leeds, and Brian Hill, who I think we just kind of found he didn't really fit the Premier League's physicality at times, and he's really kind of struggled. Those two, assume, Ben, have you heard they're in strong links to move away, and Spurs' intention would be to move those two off? And then up front, Veliz, sounds like there's a similar story. He's had some bad fortune with injuries, but it hasn't really worked out for him either. And sounds like his boyhood club maybe in for him as well.
Yeah, Valise, I think, will depart. It's as simple as that. The situation with Gil is that Tottenham need to find a solution. The player, as you say, would prefer to be elsewhere. It'll be interesting to see how that one develops. There's a few inquiries that are coming in from Turkey. There's particularly firm interest. And I'm told from those close to the player, a couple of clubs in Serie A as well. I think Gil would like to go to Spain. We'll have to see whether or not anybody comes in for him, but the expectation is he'll depart. And those two should be very clear cuts because it's a long enough window that solutions are likely to be found for each of them. Manor Solomon is a little bit different, and Tottenham are in a very strong position, in my opinion, because as you rightly say, he did well for Leeds United, and all that does is create even more interest. And he's only 25 years of age. He's younger, I think, than some people realize. He scored 10 goals in the Championship for Leeds, and they would like to try and sign him permanently. And Tottenham now hold all of the cards. I think from Leeds' perspective, they'll want more of a defined, traditional, old school, tall number 9. And they're looking at a playmaker as well, who can play behind that kind of profile. We know that they tried for Cameron Archer in January, and now Southampton are Championship and Leeds are Premier League, so they might be back in for him. I heard they like the idea of Callum Wilson, but Wilson's got the chance to stay at Newcastle and have his contract extended as well. And then they're looking at more versatile players, playmakers, 10s, advanced 8s like Emi Buendia, Gustavo Hamer. But Solomon is very high in the thinking of Leeds United. And from what I'm told, he wants to find a Premier League club and be playing Premier League football. And even though if you look at the not just goals, but goal contributions, because there were 12 assists, I believe, thrown in there as well. So that's basically 39 games played. I think that was how many he featured in, and 22 goal contributions, which is outstanding. You could make an argument and say that should be turning Tottenham's head, right? Because Son wasn't adding those kind of numbers. Timo Werner's gone. There's definitely space for Tottenham to have like a versatile winger who can also get into more central and attack-minded players and can get double figures of goals and assists. But for whatever reason, I'm still told that Tottenham are more inclined to sell Solomon rather than keep him and give him some opportunities in the Premier League as maybe a depth player. So I think by the end of the window, Solomon will likely have another club.
Ben, thank you so much. I'm going to squeeze one in before we do go for our final break of the show. There is understood to be interest in Tottenham's young youth defender, Luka Vuskovic. I know Jim has known very well. He's had him over on his channel over at the Spurs podcast for a great interview over there. We urge you to go and check that out if you haven't already. We understand Hamburg are reportedly among a several number of clubs that are interested in the player. He's actually reportedly open to the move. His situation remains uncertain though, but he's expected to take part in pre-season and a decision will be made after that. Do you think, just Ben, on this one, I don't know if you've heard too much, is it just a case of seeing how pre-season plays out, given the nature of the defender being so young and the Romero links out there at the moment with regards to his future? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think Tottenham were incredibly impressed by Vuskovic and his loan spell at Westerlo. And most of the reason why is because they're realizing this is a very intelligent player who can defend solidly, but also has a fair few attacking qualities about him as well. And that's exactly the kind of player that Spurs, and if he stays, Ange Postecoglou like, someone that can make an impact in both boxes. So Tottenham are delighted by the player, his development. They think he's on track. And to clarify, therefore, when we hear links, there's no suggestion, according to my information, that Tottenham may entertain any kind of sale or loan with an option or obligation. But what they may choose to do is loan him out for one more season. And that's where Hamburg may be a possibility. They've made an inquiry, and what they've been told by Spurs is we'll let you know later in the window, which would strongly suggest two things. Number one, they're waiting to clarify the manager situation, because if it is to be a new manager, that manager may have a different input. And two, they want to see the player in pre-season before making a final determination. So a loan is a possibility, but there's no chance for suitors of permanent transfer, because Spurs are delighted with his development.
Ben, thank you so much. We're going to squeeze in our final break of the show for our listeners and audio. We have got over nearly 11,000 of you on all of our platforms that are watching the show live. Thank you ever so much again for all your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs, which I'd appreciate at the moment with regards to following Tottenham, whether it's been watching them, listening to them, following them in training during a transfer window. It feels like there's going to be a very, very busy summer ahead, and we're going to try and guide you for every step of the way. And I hope we have Jim's help over at Oso Spurs to help us do that. We're going to get Ben as much as we can through the summer when he's not covering the rest of the other 17 Premier League clubs and overseas and what he does. Look, we're very lucky on the channel to have a lot of long-standing relationships with some wonderful journalists out there, and that goes far as Ben as well. So Ben, we thank you so much for being here. Of course, presenter, broadcaster, journalist Ben Jacobs, and the brilliant Jim from Oso Spurs. Please go and check him out. Right, this is coming to the juicy bit now, which everybody loves. It's time to talk about very quickly the players Tottenham are interested in signing this summer. Don't worry, it's not a minute. We're hoping more than a minute on this. I know some people are worried about it. It might be more than a minute. We urge you again, please keep liking, please keep subscribing, please share the show out to a wide range Spurs audience. Let's talk about a player that at the moment is in the headlines, Ben, and that is of Leroy Sané, where, according to reports over the weekend, Tottenham are now increasingly confident of signing Leroy Sané and reportedly lead the race. Sané's agent, Pine Zahavi, wants his client to join Tottenham, and Daniel Levy is understood to be pulling the strings to take Sané to London. If Spurs do manage to sign him, there are reports that it is unlikely to mean Matisse Tel will be a Spurs player, which is interesting based on what you told us earlier, Ben. We know Sané. He's had a very successful spell when he played last in the Premier League. He won 2 titles with City, 2 League Cups, an FA Cup. Of course, he would be, many would see a bit of a statement signing for Tottenham. He comes with a lot of experience where he had 73 appearances, 42 goal contributions to his name in that period. He managed to score 11 goals in his last 30 Bundesliga appearances. He has the ability to play on either wing. Do you see this, Ben, as being a potential statement for the club? And can they get this done?
He could be a statement signing. And what's true is that Pinny and Daniel are very close. And this is partly why Spurs have grown in optimism over the last kind of week or so. However, without pouring cold water on the idea that Spurs are leading the race, we mustn't forget Bayern in all of this. And despite reports that no contract has been agreed, there's a meeting early next week between Bayern and Sané where they're looking for clarity. So there is an element of games going on, because I think the player side are using suitors to hold conversations to give them maximum leverage, whether they do or don't end up signing with Bayern. And what I can tell you is that Bayern haven't given up on keeping the player. So keep an eye on the next few days, because before Sané engages in any kind of formal discussions with Tottenham, and we know that Arsenal are also alert to the opportunity as well, he's going to speak one more time to Bayern. Now, the good news for Spurs is every conversation so far with Bayern has not led to a renewal. And that's why suitors from the Premier League and Arsenal and Spurs are starting to think maybe this isn't only a game and maybe we could actually sign the player. And if in the next few days there's still no breakthrough between Bayern and Sané, Spurs will be there. Sané is certainly a concrete target, and Daniel Levy does feel that the player would prefer a move to Tottenham over Arsenal. So keep an eye on the situation. But I think before we can say definitively Spurs are leading the race as opposed to just optimistic, we have to be respectful of that key meeting, which I believe is going to take place in the next 72 hours between Bayern and Sané, because Bayern sources are still not ruling out them pulling a renewal out of the bag.
There's another player that Spurs, I think, were looking for clarity on. We were all looking for clarity on, was Johnny Cardoso, because we negotiated this deal, Ben, where we had a option to buy at a certain price that Real Betis had to accept. But my understanding is the player doesn't have to accept, though. It's not an obligation on the player side, only on the club side. And that his preference is to stay in Spain. Is that still what you're hearing at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's more likely that Cardoso ends up moving to Atletico Madrid. Although, as you rightly say, Spurs have got an option. It's quite a short option. It expires, I think, 2 weeks into the July part of the window. Unclear how the 1st to the 10th of June influences anything, because at the point when the option was negotiated, those 10 days were not known. But it's a very short window in which Tottenham have got preference. And as you rightly say, if they trigger their option for 25 million euros, then that has to be accepted by Real Betis, but the player can still say no. And I think you're absolutely right in what you say, that his priority is to remain in La Liga. I'm told Atletico Madrid are leading the race. There are reports in Spain, and some sources back this up, suggesting that a verbal agreement is close between Atletico Madrid and Real Betis for 25 million euros plus 5 million in add-ons, although it's not a done deal yet. And those close to the player make that clear, that despite reports from Spain that Atleti have agreed everything, those close to the player say it's not quite that advanced yet, but it is heading in that direction. So I do think it more likely that Cardoso ends up at Atleti rather than Spurs.
Ben, thank you so much. Appreciate that. We're going to move on. Time is pressing. We're going to there's one player that it feels has non-stop been discussed with every transfer window that Ben Jacob comes on Last Word on Spurs. It must mean that we're once again turning our attention to Eberechi Eze, a long-term target at Tottenham. Of course, we know he's a base client. We saw him, of course, spotted. Well, I say spotted. He played against Tottenham, was an influential player in, of course, Palace's win at Tottenham, in which, again, he scored a goal, played ever so well on the day, and that led to after the game, him being surrounded by a lot of Tottenham fans. We were signing autographs with them pleading, can you come to Tottenham? Eze gave a wry smile before looking at a woman at the corner of his eye, saying nothing before walking away. I think the question everyone wants to know, Ben, is this finally the summer that Tottenham pry Eberechi Eze away from Crystal Palace? Because I know a lot of the match-going fans you speak to down Spurs feel he's a typical Tottenham player. I know I've said that about a lot of players that don't end up becoming Tottenham players, but gut feeling on Eze. We know we've got this release clause of 68 million. That I think the biggest problem, and you'll tell us more, Ben, I think we had this discussion last time, is that I think Palace want that to be paid up in its full entirety, which has made it very, very hard to get this deal over the line for a lot of clubs, not just Tottenham, because, again, a lot of the clubs like to stagger their payments. Give us an update, Ben, if you can, on of course, Eberechi Eze.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. That Palace hold a lot of the cards. It's a complicated release clause, as it was for Michael Elise as well. And I actually think that the player benefits from a kind of commission from that release clause as well, which was the case also with Michael Elise. So in a weird way, even if the player wanted to move, it's in his financial interest to see the release clause triggered. Palace hold a lot of the cards because they themselves have got European football. But what I would say is that the Spurs' interest is genuine. I'm not aware of any plans yet for Spurs to trigger the clause, but now they've got Champions League football. Let's see whether it moves. I think Tottenham were quite resigned that Eze wouldn't be joining unless they triggered the clause when they didn't have Champions League football. But now there may be a way of negotiating and seeing whether there's any flexibility. But this is a deal that you've got to do by going through the front door. And by that, I mean the mechanism for triggering the clause for Eze requires you to go to Palace. So you can't go to the player side. You can't find out things from the player first. You go to Palace, you get told the terms of the clause. And Eze, like Elise did, has asked Crystal Palace to seek any interest, or perhaps that's not the right way of putting it, because Palace won't be offering him to anyone, but to filter, that's probably a better word, any interest, and then put the options, should they arise, to Eze. And then at that point, there'll be a determination as to whether he wants to speak to anybody. Permission will be given. And then, of course, it's likely that the clause will have to be triggered. But Spurs may try and dance around it a little bit. So their interest is genuine. Newcastle United, along with Mbeumo and a few other kind of versatile attackers, are also looking at Eze as well. And remember, from Tottenham's perspective, they've got a few names also on their radar in addition to Eze. Not all of these are obviously like for like or profile for profile, but Tyler Dibbling is the one that I keep hearing too in terms of a versatile attacker for him on the right side. Southampton have this public grandstanding 100 million number, but that's not my understanding. That's pretty much just games. And Tottenham's perspective with Dibbling is that they are pretty much leading the race and now determining if they want to bid. And by that, I mean that they feel the player wants to join Tottenham, but they've not decided yet whether, because of the second half of the season he had in the Premier League where he didn't play as much, they actually want to proceed with a bid. But if they do, they feel like the player will say yes. And the perspective of Spurs is this isn't a 100 million deal. This is closer to the number that was paid for James Maddison. So maybe 40, 45 million might be good enough. And then in a more central midfield position, don't forget the Angel Gomez story either. I know I'm kind of dancing around different targets here, but Gomez is another possibility. And Tottenham have made an offer. West Ham have made an offer. Other European clubs have made an offer. And what I've heard in the last kind of 48 hours is that Tottenham have grown in confidence that their offer might be accepted, whereas West Ham are pessimistic that Gomez wants to join them. So this is going to be another story to watch, because I think the player would like to make up his mind relatively quickly. He's had a little bit of time off. He's spoken to his family and his friends. He's had a lot of pre-agreement offers dating really back to January. And now I think we're going to get D-Day relatively soon. And Spurs are still there, whereas it feels like West Ham at the moment are actually out of the race.
That's exciting. I think we really need him. It's like sidetrack. But and the Eze one as well, though, but even hearing you then, it's like one of those transfers that I think every Spurs, it's like Leandro Damião all over again. But it's one of those as well that if Man City come in and say, actually, he'd make a good squad player for us, it's just dead in the water for Spurs. And that's just part of the kind of pecking order of football, right? It just is what it is. But talking of City, James McAtee is a name that kind of, it does pop around every now and again. It never feels too certain, but it's always kind of, you can just smell it in the corner, you know, it's still there.
Can you smell a transfer?
I can. It's a sixth sense, Ben. Yeah, do you hear much on him, or is that just, do you think that's just fan kind of wants more than anything?
Well, it's Leverkusen and Leipzig that were the two clubs in Germany that were really pushing. And before Emi Buendia moved to Germany, there was a concrete chance that it would be McAtee. But what you have to understand about McAtee is that he's only available if he agitates for a move. So City's perspective is that he's really important. They want to keep him. And because they're playing in the Club World Cup, unlike some of the other deals I mentioned, this one could take a bit more time, because I would expect James McAtee to go over to America to play the Club World Cup, to probably get a fair amount of minutes, then to come back and to reassess his situation. And City have a clear preference that they do not want to sell McAtee, but they also kind of have a club policy that, as with Cole Palmer or Raheem Sterling when he moved to Chelsea, if the player directly says, look, I've asked now for a couple of windows to leave, I've bided my time, I don't think I'm going to get enough minutes, then City are very understanding. So there is a chance to do business for McAtee. I've actually not heard that much about Tottenham. I'm aware of interest, but I'm not that sort of convinced yet that Tottenham have made too much contact on the player side, and certainly no club-to-club contact. Whereas, like I said before, there's a few German clubs still that are really circling and pushing, that have done quite a lot of legwork on McAtee. So it'll be interesting to see whether he prefers to stay in the Premier League, and it will kind of snowball with a player like that, because once it's clear potentially that the player wants to leave, it's also obvious to a lot of suitors that Man City won't stand in his way. So if the player decides he doesn't have a pathway for as much minutes as he wants at Manchester City, there is absolutely a deal there to be had this summer. But it will really all come down to the player. Because if he doesn't agitate for a move, City absolutely just want to keep him.
Ben, another player that's been mentioned, I think you actually personally reported this one over the course of the last week or so, and that is of Christopher Nkunku and potential availability. Spurs have inquired to Chelsea over maybe bringing him to the football club. I think you mentioned Spurs are understood to have a form of interest. They won't be the only club that are interested in him. The player is open to staying in the Premier League. What's the latest as you understand it on Christopher Nkunku, and could we actually see Tottenham and Chelsea do business for the first time in a very, very long time?
Yeah, a very long time indeed. I think from Chelsea's point of view, they want to sell Christopher Nkunku. And part of that is because the player's looking for a new challenge. He hasn't been able to play in his favoured position, which is behind the lead striker. And that's because you've got Cole Palmer there. And then this summer, you have Esteval Willian, who will arrive and is viewed by many, not just within Chelsea, but in the industry, as a generational talent. And naturally, one of Palmer or Esteval will end up having to play wide, more likely Esteval. But on that Chelsea right-hand side, you've got Noni Madueke and Pedro Neto as well. So maybe there's a scenario where Esteval bides his time and comes on off the bench. And he's the first behind the striker, advanced 8 or 10, with Palmer when fit, starting for Chelsea. And if that's the case, then naturally, Christopher Nkunku has diminished game time even further. So with opportunities limited for Christopher Nkunku, there's a real chance that he departs. And I think Chelsea are very open to a sale. In January, it was explored as well. And it was Bayern that really wanted Nkunku, and Chelsea's valuation was in and around 60 million euros, which is basically the 52 million pounds, roughly anyway, that they paid for him. So that's the kind of yardstick valuation. Perhaps suitors will feel that they can lowball slightly, maybe around the 45 million mark, because there's a bit more urgency, I think, for Chelsea and Nkunku to find a solution this summer. And at that number, I think it's relatively good value, market value, because if you look at what Nkunku did prior to joining Chelsea, there's a real player in there. He's versatile. He can play in more than one position. He's clinical. He's physical. He can use his head. He can be intricate on the edge of the area. He can get out into wide areas. So I don't think this is a case of him flopping at Chelsea at all, because when he got given opportunities in the Europa League, he was scoring goals. In the Europa Conference League, I should say. It's more just that he's not first for behind the striker, and he's not first for the striker. So he's finding himself as a squad player. Another team, he might really be able to thrive. Tottenham are interested. Reports that they'll be rivaled by Liverpool and Newcastle are not true, to my understanding. And then we have to wait and see whether Bayern return, because I can tell you, if Bayern had agreed a fee with Chelsea for Nkunku in January, then Nkunku would have said yes. So he's still very open to Bayern, but that's not to say he wouldn't also be open to Spurs if they make a bid. So this is another one that has some substance to it. And I think from Chelsea's point of view, they would like to resolve the Nkunku situation quickly. So even though Chelsea are going to the Club World Cup, I wouldn't discount some clarity on Nkunku's future in the month of June.
And Ben, I'm conscious you've got 2 minutes on the nose till you need to dash for an important trip. So I won't ask you all the 6 names I had. I'll ask you one. Jonathan David's contract situations lining up. Seems like a better time for Spurs to make a move. He's been linked a lot. Does that sound like it's got any truth in it?
Yeah, I think Spurs are one of the clubs that have looked at Jonathan David, and he's obviously a bargain. You've got West Ham, you've got Newcastle, you've got Milan. I think Barcelona has always been the player's preference as well. And now again, everyone's made their best approaches or offers, and everybody is simply waiting for Jonathan David. I think that from what I'm told, there's more chance of a move to Italy than there is to the Premier League. And I don't think Spurs can necessarily be seen as a front runner at this point. Napoli, Milan, Juventus all came in, along with Spurs, Newcastle, West Ham, Villa. It's half of the top clubs in Europe because on a free transfer, he's fantastic value. So it is really all just on the player at this point to see what might be possible. But I've just sort of heard in the last few days that Napoli is probably the more likely destination at this stage. And if it isn't to be Napoli, you've still got Juventus, you've still got Milan. And that's why I feel that it might be difficult for the Premier League clubs. So you can never say never because Spurs have been in there, but it's not one I'm hearing is close or even likely at this point for Tottenham.
Ben, let's close on the question that, everybody loves to hear from you on Last Word on Spurs. It's the multi-million-dollar question where no one will remember, Ben, by the time you next come on what you said. No one will remember, I promise you. No one ever remembers. Do you know what I'm laughing about? I know we've got to let you go. I'm asking this question. I'm laughing because we don't know who the manager's going to be at the moment. I'm asking you this question. Only Tottenham. Only Tottenham. Only Tottenham. How many potential signings, reference incoming, do you think Tottenham will sign once that window does slam shut? And we'll be following every course of the way on Monday, the 1st September. How many can you see happening, Ben, this summer?
Does the manager count as a signing?
I think it depends who the manager is. Or it could really kick off.
I'm going to say 5, and I'm going to make no comments as to one of those 5 is or isn't a manager.
Do you say that with any other club, Ben? Or is it just Tottenham you've ever heard to say that with? Is it just Tottenham?
I'd be surprised. Manchester United, think about that summer where Ten Hag won, was supposedly sacked, stayed, and went. And my club, Leicester, has got a crazy situation, sort of similar to Spurs, I guess, where we've gone down. There's still no clarity over the future of Ruud van Nistelrooy, but he's expected to depart. Chelsea have had some bonkers summers. I mean, think about that first Chelsea summer where they signed probably 8 or 9, and then within 4 weeks of the season got rid of their Champions League winning manager in Thomas Tuchel. So rest assured, Spurs fans, even though you may feel you're unique, there's a lot of drama going on at a lot of different clubs. But it is a unique situation, I must say, where if Ange goes, there'll be a lot of love for him, which means there'll be a lot of people that think it's the wrong decision. But you can't look past 22 losses and the league finish either. So I genuinely understand why Daniel Levy has needed this time to make a dispassionate decision. And even if he knows, even if he has decided, he still has to find a new manager. Otherwise, you're basically back to square one. You can't just sack Ange. It has to be a 2 thing. 1 sacked, 2 new manager, 3 move, or 1 keep. And I think that adds complication and time, because this can't just be about go on holiday, deliberate, decide, endorse Ange goes, and then leave yourself in limbo with the transfer window open. So my expectation is if Ange goes, we'll learn very quickly who the new Spurs manager is. And again, if he stays, we have to learn very quickly now. So this feels like it's Ange week. And I would be staggered. Maybe it's famous last words. It's just a personal opinion. But I would be very, very shocked if we got to Friday and we didn't know with absolute clarity if he was staying or if he was going.
Ben, we won't know if it's the right decision or not until the new if he is replaced. If he stays and does well, everyone will say it was the right decision. If he stays and the league form is not good, everyone will say wrong decision. If the new person comes in and starts slow, it was the wrong decision to get rid of him. But if they start really well, everyone will side with the decision. So there's just so many ifs and buts based on what happens next as well, isn't there? So
yeah, but I think the other way of looking at that, if we think positively, is remove the season, start from 0 points with Champions League football, with a Champions League budget, with the desire to reinvest into the squad. It gives either Ange Postecoglou or any new manager the opportunity to create a blank slate. So if Postecoglou stays, then he's in a much different situation than if he didn't win the Europa League final, not because of the trophy, although you could argue that momentum helps him, but because of the money. And if he goes, then any new manager coming in is building on that momentum, because the feel-good factor of winning a trophy and what Postecoglou achieved in the Europa League is there whether he stays or not. I don't expect a scenario where if Postecoglou went, there's doom and gloom because he's gone, not because there won't be sadness, but the trophy's still there. The momentum is still there. The players that won that trophy still have the chance to build on that. I don't see them going, oh, we're not interested now the manager's gone. We don't want to win any more trophies. We don't want to turn our league form around. And it kind of reminds me a little bit, actually, of the Chelsea situation where Postecoglou is momentum building in the very last gasp part of the season. So there's a lot of love for him. And another ex-Spurs manager in Maurizio Pochettino had done the same at Chelsea. I think he'd won his final 6 games and there was a lot of love for him as well. Then he went and there was genuine sadness in the Chelsea dressing room because a lot of players thought he was building something. But within a few weeks, Maresca came in and the same players were really enjoying it under Enzo Maresca and were very motivated and hungry. And obviously Chelsea went on themselves to get Champions League and win a European trophy as well. So I think in essence, the most important thing in all of this is just the foundation's built, whether under Ange or not. The money from the Champions League, whether under Ange or not, are all there now, as is a trophy that's going to remain in the cabinet. It's a great club, fantastic stadium. It's a brilliant fan base. So now it's just a case of forgetting about the league part of last season. And the only mistake, I think, and again, it's just my personal opinion, the only error Levy can make is allowing this to drag on. Because if it gets to another week or two, you might be missing out on targets that say, if you can't tell me who the manager is, I'm going to go elsewhere. If it gets to pre-season, it would be farcical for him to return and them still be trying for other candidates. And I know if they stick with him and then 10 games go badly and they get rid of him, people will say there's no clarity, there's no strategy. But that is just football, right? And the reality is that even if Ange stays, if they start the Premier League season as badly as they finish the Premier League season, he will go in the early part of the season. And that will be a consideration in Ange's mind. And that will be a consideration in Levy's mind, which is why maybe a change is made now to avoid the possibility of doing what United did 12 months ago and having to back Ten Hag, celebrate Ten Hag and sack Ten Hag in the space of 3 months. But right now, I repeat what I said before. Levy may or may not have made a decision in his head, but there's no candidate lined up yet, which could delay things. And Ange has not had anything communicated to him at the time we're live. So let's see whether that changes. But I just think we will have Ange clarity by the end of this week.
Ben, thank you so much. Jim, thank you so much. Thank you to over the 14,500 that have been listening and watching Last Word on Spurs over the course of us being live, where in typical Tottenham fashion, we're waiting to hear further news. Ben, very, very quick. I know you've got a train to dash. Where can everybody find you? Not quite literally, because we can't afford to have 14,000 looking for Ben right now. He's about to dash off. Ben, where can we find the wonderful work you do, not only for Tottenham, but across the footballing community? We know your summer, I don't want to scare you, has only just started. It never stops. Where can I find you, Ben?
Yeah, appreciate that. At Jacobs Ben, of course, on X, Ben David Jacobs on Instagram. Talk Sport all summer. I'll be covering the Club World Cup and the transfer market. And on Talk Sport, we've got a daily transfer show now that I believe is available on YouTube. So make sure you tune into that. That will launch tomorrow. And then all of my written stuff is across the Gimme Sport network too. So stay tuned, because we're going to have a mini window, first the 10th of June, and then the proper window from the 16th of June to the 1st of September. And it will be busy.
Yes, it will be busy. We are going to need our sleep, all of us, collectively, to make this work. I want to say a massive thank you to the wonderful Jim at Hotspur, the brilliant Ben Jacobs. We'll be seeing more of Ben across the summer, and Jim too. Look, guys, thank you so much for all your support. Keep liking, keep subscribing. From us all here, please keep safe, keep well. We'll be back quicker than you know it. And as always, come on, you Spurs.